The gas station glows like a small island of fluorescent light in the darkness, surrounded by empty streets and the distant hum of highway traffic. Al Pacino pulls his car up to pump number 3, engine ticking as it cools, and sits for a moment watching the attendant through the bulletproof glass of the service booth. The man looks to be in his 50s, reading a paperback novel between customers, occasionally glancing up when cars pass on the street beyond. It's nearly 2 in the morning on a Wednesday. Al Pacino has been driving for hours, no particular destination in mind, just moving through the city to avoid the silence of his apartment. Sleep hasn't come easily lately, and the empty rooms feel more oppressive than the empty roads. At least driving gives him the illusion of purpose, of going somewhere, even when he has nowhere to go. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it. The apartment he left 3 hours ago sits 40 floors above Manhattan, filled with expensive furniture that was chosen by an interior designer he met once and never saw again. Everything coordinates perfectly, every piece selected for its aesthetic value rather than comfort or personal meaning. The living room could appear in an architectural magazine, and probably has. But it doesn't feel like home because home requires the presence of people who choose to be there, who fill the space with their own belongings and routines and love. He gets out of the car and starts pumping gas, watching the numbers climb on the digital display. The night air carries the smell of gasoline and exhaust, urban scents that somehow comfort him more than the carefully filtered atmosphere of his penthouse. Out here, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he feels more real somehow, more connected to the ordinary world that fame usually keeps at arm's length. The attendant emerges from the booth to empty the trash bins, moving with the methodical efficiency of someone performing familiar tasks. He's wearing a name tag that reads Frank and a uniform shirt that's seen better days. When he notices Al Pacino at the pump, he nods politely but shows no sign of recognition. Just one customer acknowledging another in the democracy of late-night gas stations. This is what Al Pacino has been searching for during his midnight drives, though he didn't understand it until this moment. The blessing of anonymity, the relief of being seen as just another person rather than a commodity or symbol or carefully managed public image. Frank sees a middle-aged man pumping gas at 2 a.m., nothing more or less than that simple human reality. Al Pacino finishes pumping and walks toward the booth to pay. Through the intercom, he can hear a radio playing softly, some talk show where people call in to discuss their problems with a host who offers generic advice. The attendant looks up from his book, friendly but tired, ready to complete another routine transaction and return to his reading. Frank slides, open the payment window, and says the amount owed. His voice is matter-of-fact, neither impressed nor disinterested, just professionally neutral. Al Pacino hands over a credit card, and for a moment their fingers brush as the card changes hands. The contact is brief and meaningless, but feels like the most genuine human interaction he's had in weeks. While Frank processes the payment, Al Pacino glances at the book lying open on the counter. It's a mystery novel, something about a detective in a small town investigating a decades-old murder. The kind of escapist fiction that people read to forget their own problems, to lose themselves in someone else's carefully constructed drama. Frank catches him looking and grins sheepishly. Guilty pleasure, Frank says, holding up the book. Wife thinks I'm crazy for reading these things, but I like trying to figure out who did it before the detective does. He shrugs, a gesture that suggests he's comfortable with his simple interests, unbothered by anyone else's opinion about how he spends his free time. Al Pacino finds himself smiling, surprised by the easy warmth in Frank's voice. Any good? He asks, nodding toward the book. The question feels strange in his mouth, this casual inquiry between strangers about something as ordinary as reading preferences. When was the last time he talked to someone about books without it being an interview or a publicity event? Pretty good so far, Frank says, returning the credit card. Though I think I figured out the killer already. It's always the person you least suspect, you know? That's the rule with these things. He laughs, a sound that's genuinely amused rather than polite. My wife says I'm too cynical, but I think I just watch too much TV. The conversation should end there. Frank has processed the payment, done his job, fulfilled his professional obligation. But something about the late hour and the empty station and the strange democracy of insomnia keeps them both lingering at the window. Al Pacino doesn't move toward his car. and Frank doesn't close the payment window or return to his book. "You're out late," Frank observes, not prying, but making conversation the way people do when they're both awake at an hour when most of the world sleeps. "Long drive ahead?" Al Pacino considers the question. How does he explain that he's driving nowhere in particular? That he's just trying to outrun the silence of his own life? That he'd rather burn gas on empty highways than sit in an empty apartment counting the hours until dawn? Instead, he settles for something simpler, more honest than anything he's said in an interview in years. "Couldn't sleep," he says. "Sometimes driving helps." Frank nods with the understanding of someone who's worked plenty of night shifts, who knows the particular quality of 2 a.m. restlessness. "I get that," he says. "Different for me, though. When I can't sleep, I come here." He gestures around the small booth, the cramped space filled with security monitors and candy displays and the detritus of minimum wage work. Wife snores, and the kids are loud even when they're sleeping. This place is quiet. Nobody bothers you. The honesty of it catches Al Pacino off guard. Here's a man who finds peace in a gas station booth, who treats overnight work as refuge rather than punishment. Someone whose life is small enough that he can explain it simply, without layers of management and interpretation and careful image construction. Al Pacino tries to imagine what it would be like to have problems so concrete, so manageable. A snoring spouse, noisy children, the need for occasional solitude that can be satisfied by working an extra shift. Frank's troubles have solutions, or at least clear parameters. They exist in the real world where actions have direct consequences and effort produces measurable results. "Must be nice," Al Pacino says, and means it. The quiet. Frank looks at him more closely, perhaps hearing something in his voice that suggests his own complicated relationship with solitude. "Sometimes," Frank says, "but sometimes it gets too quiet, you know? Like when you realize you've been sitting here for 4 hours and the only people you've talked to are buying cigarettes and lottery tickets." They stand in comfortable silence for a moment, two men awake when they should be sleeping, finding unexpected companionship in the fluorescent glow of an all-night gas station. Al Pacino feels something unfamiliar settling in his chest, a kind of peace that comes from being seen without being recognized, from having a conversation that exists entirely in the present moment without reference to his past or future or public image. He thinks about his own relationship with quiet, how silence in his apartment feels different from Frank's peaceful booth. His quiet is empty, hollow, filled with the absence of connection rather than the presence of solitude. Frank chooses his quiet, controls it, can end it whenever he wants by calling his wife or going home to his noisy children. Al Pacino's quiet chooses him, surrounds him whether he wants it or not, follows him even into crowded rooms full of people who see only his public persona. "You work nights often?" Al Pacino asks, genuinely curious about this man's life, this routine that seems so foreign to his own carefully scheduled existence. 3 nights a week, Frank says. "Need the extra money, you know? Daughter's starting college next year, and even with her scholarship, it's going to be tight." He says this without complaint or self-pity, just stating facts about his life the way other people discuss the weather. "Wife works days, I work nights. We tag-team the kids, tag-team the bills." Al Pacino thinks about his own financial situation, the complex investments and tax shelters and multiple income streams that require a team of professionals to manage. Money hasn't been a practical concern for him in decades. But listening to Frank talk about college costs and extra shifts, he remembers what it felt like when every dollar mattered, when earning money was directly connected to hours worked and effort expended. But more than the money, he envies Frank's purpose. The man works extra shifts for his daughter's education, sacrifices sleep for someone else's future, finds meaning in the simple mathematics of hours worked equals tuition paid. Al Pacino's work serves no one but himself now, feeds no family, supports no dreams beyond the abstract goal of maintaining his reputation and adding to a legacy that feels more and more meaningless with each passing year. College is expensive, he agrees, though the words feel inadequate. His understanding of financial pressure is theoretical now, something he remembers rather than lives. But Frank's concern for his daughter's future seems real and immediate, the kind of straightforward parental worry that fame has made impossible for Al Pacino to experience normally. "Tell me about it," Frank laughs. "But she's smart, you know? Wants to be a teacher. Says she wants to help kids who don't have much, like she did growing up. His pride is obvious and unguarded. The simple satisfaction of a parent whose child has turned out well despite limited resources. Figure if I can work a few extra shifts to help her do that. It's worth it. The love in his voice is so clear, so uncomplicated, that it makes Al Pacino's chest tighten. Here's a man whose relationship with his daughter isn't mediated by agents or security concerns or careful management of their public appearances together. He can be proud of her openly, can worry about her future without considering how his worry might be perceived by strangers, can love her without their relationship becoming content for public consumption. Al Pacino thinks about the children he never had, the family he never built because fame made the simple act of loving someone too complicated, too public, too dangerous for the other person involved. Frank can work night shifts to pay for his daughter's college without anyone questioning his motives or turning his sacrifice into a story about celebrity parenting. His love is private, uncommodified, allowed to exist for its own sake rather than for public consumption. Sounds like you raised her right, Al Pacino says, and the words come out more emotional than he intended. Frank doesn't seem to notice the crack in his voice, just grins with the easy pleasure of someone who's complimented about his family. Wife did most of the work, Frank says with the automatic modesty of men who've been married long enough to know where credit belongs. I just try not to mess it up too bad. He glances at the clock on the wall. Speaking of which, I should call home soon. Wife worries when I don't check in. The casual mention of someone waiting at home, someone who cares enough to worry about a gas station attendant working the night shift, hits Al Pacino like a physical blow. When was the last time someone worried about his safety not because his injury might affect box office numbers or publicity schedules, but simply because they loved him? When was the last time he called someone just to let them know he was okay? His apartment has an answering machine that receives messages from agents, assistants, business associates, people whose concern for his well-being is directly tied to their professional relationship with him. But no one calls just to hear his voice, to make sure he made it home safely, to share the small details of their day without any agenda beyond connection and love. A car pulls into the station, headlights sweeping across the pumps before stopping at number. A woman gets out, probably a nurse or security guard ending a late shift, and starts pumping gas with the efficient movements of someone who wants to get home as quickly as possible. Frank watches her through the window, ready to help if she needs anything, but giving her privacy to complete her transaction. Busy night, Al Pacino asks, though he can see from the empty lot that it hasn't been. Nah, pretty quiet, Frank says. Usual late-night crowd. People getting off work, people who can't sleep, people just passing through. He looks at Al Pacino with mild curiosity. Which one are you? The question is asked without judgment, just friendly interest in the stranger who's lingered longer than most customers. But it catches Al Pacino unprepared, forces him to categorize himself in terms that have nothing to do with his career or fame or public image. Just a simple human question about why he's out driving at 2 a.m. Can't sleep, I guess, he says, though that's not entirely accurate. He could probably sleep if he tried, if he took one of the pills his doctor prescribed for exactly this problem. But he doesn't want to sleep, because sleeping means waking up tomorrow to the same carefully managed existence, the same professional obligations, the same performance of being Al Pacino. Frank's question forces him to confront the reality of his midnight driving. He's not really someone who can't sleep, and he's not someone getting off work, and he's definitely not just passing through. He's someone running away from his own life, using his car as a mobile hiding place where he can pretend to be just another anonymous person moving through the city at night. Yeah, I get it, Frank says with easy sympathy. My mind races sometimes, especially when I'm worried about something. Work stuff, family stuff, just life stuff. He shrugs. Sometimes it's easier to stay awake and do something useful than to lie in bed thinking about things you can't control. Frank's worries are concrete and solvable. College tuition, work schedules, family logistics. Problems that can be addressed with extra shifts and careful budgeting and the simple passage of time. But Al Pacino's worries are more abstract, more existential. How do you solve the problem of being too famous to live normally? How do you budget for the cost of isolation? How much time has to pass before you can be just a person again instead of a symbol? The woman at pump 1 finishes filling her tank and walks toward the booth. Frank straightens, ready to shift back into professional mode. But Al Pacino finds himself reluctant to end the conversation. For 20 minutes, he's been just another insomniac talking to a gas station attendant, and the normalcy of it feels precious in a way he can't explain. "Well," he says, stepping back from the window as the woman approaches. "Thanks for the conversation." Frank looks genuinely pleased, as if talking to a stranger about books and family and sleeplessness has been a highlight of his shift rather than just another interruption. "Anytime," he says. "Drive safe out there." The woman steps up to the window, and Al Pacino walks back to his car, listening to Frank greet the next customer with the same friendly professionalism he showed him. No recognition, no special treatment, no acknowledgement that their interaction was anything other than routine. Just one human being treating another with basic courtesy and kindness. He sits in his car for a moment before starting the engine, watching Frank through the bulletproof glass as he processes the woman's payment and returns to his mystery novel. The scene has an ordinary beauty that Al Pacino rarely gets to witness. The simple satisfaction of a man doing his job well while his family sleeps safely at home, while his daughter dreams about teaching children who need help, while his wife trusts him enough to sleep soundly, knowing he'll call to check in. This is what normal life looks like, Al Pacino realizes. Not the carefully managed existence he's constructed around his fame, but this collection of small responsibilities and modest pleasures and uncomplicated love. Frank works night shifts to pay for his daughter's education, reads mystery novels to pass the time, calls his wife so she won't worry. Simple human activities that create meaning without requiring an audience or generating content for public consumption. But as he starts the engine and pulls away from the gas station, Al Pacino understands that the normalcy he just experienced was artificial, dependent on Frank's failure to recognize it. The moment Frank realizes who he was talking to, their conversation will change in his memory. It will become a story Frank tells about the night he met Al Pacino, filtered through the lens of celebrity rather than remembered as a simple human interaction between two insomniacs. The knowledge sits heavy in his chest as he drives away. Even his authentic moments are temporary, borrowed time stolen from a life that belongs to the public rather than to him. He can visit normalcy like a tourist, can experience ordinary human connection by pretending to be someone else, but he can never actually live there because Al Pacino, the person, has been consumed by Al Pacino, the brand. The city stretches around him as he drives past gas stations and late-night diners, places where people work through the dark to keep life moving. Al Pacino can only enter these spaces as a tourist, tasting normalcy only through anonymity. Frank's kindness was real, but it was given to a stranger, not to Al Pacino, whose identity would have altered everything. He imagines Frank calling his wife, mentioning a quiet shift, maybe a friendly customer who couldn't sleep. An ordinary conversation, quickly forgotten. But if Frank ever realizes who that customer was, the moment would change. It would become a story. The night he met Al Pacino, analyzed and retold, stripped of its simple humanity. This is the trap of fame. Even genuine moments turn into performance once he's recognized. Sincerity becomes a narrative. Loneliness becomes proof of relatability. Normal conversation becomes content. Everyone else can speak freely without it being transformed into a story. He drives on, holding the memory of 20 minutes of ordinary conversation already fading, like a role briefly played. The gas station slips from view, Frank likely back to his book, his routine, his life full of people who love him simply for being who he is. And Al Pacino, heading toward an empty apartment, understands that even his normal moments are temporary escapes. Authentic connection is only possible when the other person doesn't know who he is. The world Frank inhabits, a world of ordinary worries and uncomplicated identity, is one Al Pacino can observe but never enter. Streetlights lead him back to his building, to the doorman and the elevator, to a life of comfort, missing the one thing he wants most. The freedom to be unknown, unremarkable, just another human being passing through the night. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the video. I always enjoy reading your feedback.